Hey folks, today we are covering another systems thinking tool called the SIPOC. This is a tool that I was introduced to during my Six Sigma days when I went through the process of getting Six Sigma certified. It's one of the main tools that's used in the world of Six Sigma. It's used as a process mapping tool, although it's different than some of the tools that I've recently covered, like the swim lane diagram. And I've put my own spin on how I use SIPOCs these days. So I'm going to talk first about the basic SIPOC and what that looks like. And then I'm going to talk through some of the things that I do differently nowadays when I use SIPOCs. So let's go ahead and get into it. So as I mentioned, a SIPOC is a tool that's used to map processes. And SIPOC is an acronym, SIPOC. It stands for Supplier, Input, Process Step, Output, Customer. Okay, and it's a reminder of what you need to do to complete the actual tool, what you're looking to analyze in your business if you're using this tool to help you map a process. Now, go back to some of the systems thinking fundamentals that I've covered in the past. Remember that a system is comprised of a few different things. The main piece of it is process steps. That's each of the steps that you do to move through your system. And each of those steps has inputs and outputs. Okay, so the SIPOC is really focused on defining what are the inputs, what are the process steps, what are the outputs. Now, the S stands for supplier, and that identifies who is providing each of the inputs in the process. Okay, so for each input, you're going to have a supplier, either a person or a piece of technology that's actually creating that input. And it's important to, when you identify people, just a reminder, identify the roles that they're in. Don't use people's names. You don't want to do that, because if somebody leaves your business, then all your documentation is out of date and you have to go in and edit that. So supplier being the person or technology that's providing the input. And then on the end, the customer is the person or technology that is receiving the outputs. And that is, from a high level, what a SIPOC is. So the value that the SIPOC brings is similar to the swim lane diagram, but it's a little bit different because it's got different information in it. It goes down to a greater level of detail, and it helps you deconstruct what's actually happening in that process. You've got better information to do some of your process improvement efforts that you want to do within your business. Having an understanding of the outputs means you're going to have a better understanding of the correlation between the process and the system and the outcomes that you're creating, because outcomes are derived from the outputs of your processes. Okay, let me say that again. The outcomes that you're getting in your business are because of the outputs that you're creating and the experiences that people within your business are having with those outputs. So having the SIPOC and that greater level of detail on the input side and the output side, it's going to give you better information to go in and really start to fine tune and tweak the systems that you have to make them more efficient. And keep in mind that the outputs that you get in a process are a function of the process steps and the inputs. So if you want different outputs, change the process steps and change the inputs. That'll give you different outputs, which might or might not give you different outcomes depending on some other factors there. But ultimately, that is the way to get different outcomes. It's changing that whole flow, looking at your inputs, making changes there, changing the process steps, leading to different outputs and eventually different outcomes. So let me talk through the mechanics of creating a SIPOC and how you want to approach this. First, define your system, and if you haven't already done it, define the desired outcomes you want from that system. That always serves as that guidepost As we look at the things we're doing, we're always driving towards outcomes and making sure that we're not doing things that don't help us achieve those outcomes. And everything that we are doing is pointing us in the right direction. Once you have that, look at the process that exists within that system and define the bookends. Okay, where does the process start and where does the process end? From there, you're going to go through each step that starts from your start and takes you to that finish. What are all of the steps that go along the way for you to get from the start to the finish in your process? For each of those steps, now you're going to identify what inputs are coming into that step and who is providing them, who is the supplier. You're also going to identify what are the outputs that come out of that step and who is the customer of those outputs. And understand that a lot of times you will see the outputs of one step become the inputs to the next step. Okay, you'll see that a lot. Most of the outputs within the middle of a process, they become the inputs to the next step. So if you see a lot of that, don't get worried that you're doing it wrong or you're not thinking about it the right way. That's exactly what you should see, is the outputs from step A become the inputs into step B, and the outputs from step B become the inputs into step C, and so on. So for a basic SIPOC, that's it. That's how you'd put it together. It's not super fancy. It's not crazy difficult. It's just a matter of sitting down, define those bookends. Where are you starting? Where are you finishing? How do you get there? And inputs, outputs, supplier, and customer for each of the steps along the way. Now, as I said in the beginning, there are a few things that I do differently nowadays that add additional value to the SIPOC and taking the time to complete one of these. First, when I'm looking at the inputs, I'm going to identify if the input is controllable or not, controllable by me. Okay, so in your case, you looking at your process, controllable by you. And the reason we want to do that is because if an input is not controllable, then it doesn't really matter. You don't want to spend a lot of time trying to look at that input and figure out what can you do differently. So by identifying it being not controllable, you can set it aside and not waste any energy trying to think about how you make that better. An example of that might be something like in an accounting process. If you're paying your taxes, you have forms from the IRS or your local government agency, and those forms are going to be an input somewhere into your process of paying taxes. Those forms are not controllable by you, by me, by anybody other than the government. And so we mark that as not controllable, and that way we can set it to the side. We acknowledge that it's an input and it's part of our process, but we don't want to spend any time trying to figure out how do we change the form, because we're never going to get the government to change those tax forms. Another thing that I do is for each of the process steps, identify if they're value add or not. Now, value add is a description that I see applied a lot of different ways, and I want you to be really strict with how you define value add when you're talking about your business processes and the systems that you have in your business. Use this definition. When we say value add, is the customer willing to pay more money because you are doing that step? That's the only definition I want you to use of value add when you're doing process work. Okay, what you're going to find is that a lot of the steps in your processes are actually non-value add. The customer's not paying you more money just because you're doing that thing. You have a lot of overhead, a lot of administrative burdens, a lot of things that you do within your business because you think it's a good idea or you think you need to do that thing in order to run the business, but the customer doesn't actually pay you more because you have that step in the process. And it becomes really important to see that, because when we start to, again, dive into looking at how do we make a process more efficient, one of the things we're looking at is what are we doing that's not actually adding value to the customer that the customer is willing to pay for. And it gives us a lot of opportunity to find those things that are waste within our processes and eliminate those. Now, what you'll find is that in a process, you might have 80% or more of your process steps identified as non-value add, and that's okay. That's right. Okay. I don't want you to look at that and think, wow, I was too harsh or I was wrong. I will tell you, most processes and most businesses, large and small, the number of steps that they actually do that are value add are actually pretty small. And there's a lot of extra work that goes into supporting or making those few steps happen, but not in a way that they actually add value. So go ahead and be ruthless in how you define that. But it's another thing that you can do to your SIPOC that's going to make your SIPOC more valuable as we go through and look to make improvements. Again, it'll help you identify, hey, these process steps, we've got 30 of them and 25 of them are not actually adding value. Let's go look at those and see if there's something we can stop doing or something we can take out of that process. Another thing I do is for each of the outputs, I identify if they have an impact on the outcomes that you're getting from the system. So what you'll find again is a lot of times we're creating outputs and they don't always have an impact on the outcomes that are being produced by that system. And again, it's just an informational thing so that later on, as we're looking to make adjustments and improvements, we can really hone in on, hey, what are the things that really matter in our process? If we want to drive different outcomes, then we need to go and change the outputs that have impact on those outcomes. And then another thing that I do is for each of those process steps, I identify two numbers or two measurements of time. First is how long does it take to actually do the work associated with that task? That's me sitting down at a desk and actually doing the work, or whoever is doing the task. The other piece of time that I want you to track for each of these process steps is the calendar time. So you think about, you're doing something or you have this process step, and that step might happen over a day or even multiple days, even though there's only an hour's worth of work, actual labor in that step. Think about delivering a package. If you go and mail a package, you've got to spend time putting it in the box. If you're mailing out a product, you're taking your product, you're putting it in the box, you're putting the shipping label on that, and you're driving it to the UPS store, the FedEx store, et cetera, wherever you're taking that to send that out. And then you send the package. Well, you're going to have a few days where nothing's happening, right? The UPS or the postal carrier that you're using is doing their delivery piece, but you're not actually having to do work, although it takes, call it 2 days for that package to actually get delivered. So in that case, it's maybe 15 minutes of actual work, but then the calendar time is actually 2 days because that's how long it takes to complete that step from me putting the product in the box and shipping it to it actually showing up on the customer's doorstep. So track both of those pieces of time with each of the process steps. How much time actually goes in the form of work, and how much time passes on the calendar or on a clock from the time you start that one step to the time that you finish. Last, on things that I do differently with SIPOCs, I find them a lot more valuable if I pair them with a swim lane diagram. Those documents complement each other really well. The SIPOC is more informational and it's more words about here's what's going on and here's all your inputs and your suppliers and outputs, etc. Whereas the swim lane diagram is more about the flow and it shows you what's happening in more of a flow sense. So I typically will pair these documents together when I'm getting real serious about process improvement. I'll have a swim lane diagram and then I'll have an accompanying SIPOC, and I reference the boxes that I put on the swim lane diagram will be referenced in the SIPOC, so you know which step in the diagram goes to which row or rows in that SIPOC. Talking through technology on this, it's going to be really simple. When I first learned how to do SIPOCs, I was taught to do them in Excel. I do them very much the same way today. So spreadsheet programs are great for these, either Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets. And it's really simple. You're just ultimately putting in rows for each of those process steps, and then you're identifying the different fields around suppliers, inputs, and some of the other things that we've talked about, et cetera. There is an example of a SIPOC on the resources site, so you're able to go there and download that example just so you can get a feel for what it should look like and how to fill it out. So the SIPOC is a tool that's going to help you scale your business. Similar to the swim lane diagram, a SIPOC is really designed to help you get more efficient with the things that you're doing. And in that sense, improving your efficiency is going to make it easier for you to scale your business because you won't have as much junk that's going to scale with you. So use a SIPOC to lean out your processes, to identify the waste that you have, the non-value added steps, inputs that don't actually matter, outputs that are causing you problems. You can use this document to really fine tune your processes. And then when you go to scale your business, you're going to have sleek processes that are giving you what you need and not a lot extra of what you don't need. And so in that sense, again, very similar to the swim lane diagram, the SIPOC will help you get more efficient, and that's going to make it easier for you to scale your business. The SIPOC is also a tool that can help you from a people management perspective. What the SIPOC does is it opens up an opportunity for you to leverage your staff to help you do this work. And in doing so, you're going to create a lot of goodwill with your employees. They're going to see you taking an interest in their thoughts and how they can improve things, how they can do better. Let them do the SIPOC, get them involved and have them help you. You should really be doing that anyway. Anytime you document a process, you want the people that are doing the work to actually document what's happening. You don't ever want to come out and say, well, I know it's happening because I told Jim to do it this way. You don't ever want to do that. Let Jim go and tell you this is what he's doing, step 1, step 2, step 3. So completing that SIPOC gives you a leadership opportunity to work with your staff, help them help you, and show them that you're interested in their thoughts and their ideas for improving the business. That's going to help them feel heard. That's going to make them feel better about their spot in your company, and the value that you put on their opinion will go a long way towards making them feel better about their job and the work that they're doing. So that covers our review of the SIPOC. Again, there's a template available on resources.optimizeforoutcomes.com. It's referred to as a SIPOC 2.0 because it does have those extra fields that I'd mentioned. It's not just the traditional five fields around supplier input, process step, output, and customer. It's got some of those extra fields that I talked about. Non-value add, is the input controllable, etc. So you can download that and have that as an example. If you have any questions about anything I covered, as always, you can contact me on your social media platform of choice, or you can email me at brian@optimizeforoutcomes.com. Thanks, and I will see you online.